All right, thanks everybody for being here today. We're going to talk about syndication in this portion of the meeting. We've got 40 minutes to talk. We're probably going to take about 15 minutes. It doesn't take much to talk about syndication. I've got Bill Graham here from Longview, Texas. And the reason Bill and I are going to talk about this is because we just recently did a deal together. Now the deal that we did, Bill's associate or one of his agents in his office, Megan Byrne, presented on the global sales call that we have every 2 weeks about an apartment complex in Longview, Texas. And Keith and I had sat down and determined that we would like to get a 10% return for our investors that invest with us on a cash-by-cash annual basis. So we figured out what the cap rate would be that we would need to purchase the property for in order to get that 10% cash-on-cash return. And we had determined through the capital stack method that our cap rate was about 7.86. Anything above that, and we could purchase the property and still get our investors a 10% cash-on-cash return. So Megan presents this 10.3 cap property, and before the before she even finished talking, I'm texting her through LinkedIn because I didn't have her direct contact information. Through LinkedIn, I was connected with her and I texted her and I said, send me this info, we're interested now. And she wasn't even done talking on the call yet. And well, long story short, we ended up purchasing that property, and we were able to purchase it because Keith and I brought investors to the deal. We put a package together, sent it out to some of our affiliates that are in our office and sent it to some other affiliates around the country, and seen how many people wanted to invest with us. We were able to raise right at $300,000 and brought the equity to the deal. Bill had set us up with a lender in Texas, and that lender was able to get us a bridge loan that not only got us the purchase price, but also our rehab investment money, which was about $250,000. So a $995,000 purchase price, and we got a $1,040,000 loan by bringing $300,000 to the table. And Bill, you want to say anything about this deal?
Just the funnier part about when we presented down the call, Rich, the guy that that does our calls for us, actually called like 10 minutes later, and he wanted the same deal. And so I'm going to get to the end of my little chat. It has a lot to do with about tell the truth or die. Well, so we're like, oh my gosh, now we got this group, which we didn't know very well at the time, and then our leader, and they're all fighting. So we thought, next best thing, put them on the phone together. We'll work it out. And it did. Rich just kind of backed up and said, let these guys go. But anyway, and I will say one note about, huge point about, you got 2 minutes, don't bore people to death. One little bit different note is I was taught as well, for those that are in their car listening to the call, it doesn't hurt to at least say the price. I agree 100%. Don't read the stuff because everybody can read it, but it doesn't hurt to say the price and maybe the cap rate, just that, because if you got guys on the phone, that may help. But anyway, if you get bored with these a lot of times, you're like, I'm not going to California with a -2 cap. I mean, we're just not doing it. But don't ignore this call. Every now and then there'll be a little piece of cheese on there that really fits you, and you don't want to miss it. So go ahead.
So back on syndication, I think one of the important things to look at, and Neil and I were talking about this in the car yesterday, you list these properties, and sometimes you get excited, you work with the owner, and they give you the listing and they send you all the financial information, and you put the value on the property and you're looking at it and you're like, what in the world did I list this for? Why didn't I buy it? and that's kind of how Neil got into doing syndication, 15, 20 years ago?
It was the RTC days, actually, which is, I don't know, maybe 30 years.
30 years. Neil's showing his age right now. So the whole premise is, you don't always assume that as real estate brokers and agents that all we do is broker deals. If the deal looks good, there are investors that will invest in the deal, and I hate to use his analogy, but Robert Kiyosaki said it best: you find the deal, the money will find you. The money chases the deal, and that is the case. So all it really takes is a little bit of knowledge and understanding what the syndication laws are, which are governed by the SEC with the U.S. government, which is the Securities and Exchange Commission. And really what you want to be careful of is whether you're advertising to people you don't know or not and who those people are. If you know them, friends, family, colleagues, influencers in your marketplace that you have a relationship with, then you don't really need to ensure that they are what we call a accredited investor. Now the IRS defines an accredited investor as somebody that is net worth is over $1 million. That cannot include their single family residence, and that's just a change. Well, what, about 3 years ago, I think they changed that. So you cannot include your home, the equity in your home, or $200,000 a year annual income for the last 2 years as an individual, or $300,000 a year annual income as a couple if your spouse works as well. If you meet either one of those two criteria, and again that's over the last 2 years, then you're an accredited investor. If you're advertising out in the marketplace, and you used to not be able to advertise in the marketplace, but with Dodd-Frank regulations after the crash in 2008, the U.S. government said, you know what, maybe we ought to let these guys advertise. So they allowed advertising, but you could only advertise to those accredited investors. Another change, I don't want to get into the weeds on accredited investors, but if you are advertising out into the general marketplace and you're putting up ads and you're trying to bring in people you don't know and they are accredited, it used to be you just had them fill out a simple form that stated whether they were accredited or not, and that was fine. Well, now, because of the new rule, you actually have to have an audited financial statement from them to ensure they are accredited. But it is a great way to get into syndicating deals with people you don't know, and that's through advertising. Now, one of the best ways to do that is through crowdfunding. So if you haven't done any deals before, get with these crowdfunding companies, prove your property, prove you can get the deal done, and let them go out and find those accredited investors so you don't have to worry about it. And then they make sure that they have the proper paperwork and everything else and that they are accredited. But what Keith and I did, now that is on what they call a 506C regulation, under Rule 506C, where you can advertise to the marketplace but can only accept accredited investors. We did a 506B offering, which allows you to accept non-accredited investors, or what they call sophisticated investors. And what that means is we were able to reach out to other people within our area of influence that weren't wealthy or rich or made $250,000 or $300,000 a year, and it allowed us to bring normal people to the table. Normal.
Not abnormal.
Yeah, that's right, not abnormal. To the table that we wouldn't have been able to do reaching out to accredited investors. I think it would have taken longer to do that. And what we didn't do is advertise. And because we didn't advertise and we just went to them directly with an already existing relationship, that allowed us to put that money together in time to close on the deal that we did in Longview, Texas. And I just want everybody to know that anybody can do this. You don't have to have years of experience in real estate. You just have to have a little bit of confidence in yourself to reach out and show them the deal and say, this is what it'll do. And if you put together the property properly and it is a good solid investment, and they can see whether it's a solid investment or not, they're going to do the deal with you. And you can raise the money and take them down. And what's really important about this is, I'm pretty sure we all got into real estate because we're trying to build our wealth, because we're not relying on the stock market to pay our retirement after we get to that retirement age. And in this business, I don't know if I'll ever retire. I just love it. So in order to do that, you're going to have reoccurring income. Well, commissions aren't reoccurring income. When you go out and you close on a property and you get that commission, that's it. You got to start all over again. And now you got to go work for that next commission. So that's not reoccurring income. And in order to get that, you either have to own a property management company or do property management, or you can do syndication. And Jack Carroll, within our Sperry Commercial Global Affiliate, I think he said it best. It's like this table right here. I know you can't see it on camera. Oh, that's heavy. I'm gonna pull this over here so you can see it. This table, let's say this table is us on top. It has 4 legs. Each of these legs is a cash flow. So how do we get cash flow? Well, commissions is one of those cash flows. So that's one leg. If that's all you're relying on, then it's a constant balancing act. You have no stability. If something happens in the marketplace, you could fall down, and now what are you going to do? So we try to have additional cash flow streams. By doing syndication, building that wealth, you have an additional cash flow stream that if something does happen in the marketplace, you've got a way to supplement that income you've got coming in and can withstand that downturn in the market and be able to keep moving. Property management's another one. We have a couple people in here that do property management. That's another leg to the stool. People have to be in properties regardless of what the market is doing. You may go down in rents a little bit, depending on where you are. If you're in California, they're probably going to go down a lot. In Alabama, they're not going to go down that much. It'll affect your cash flow a little, but you can survive through it. As long as you bought the property correctly and you didn't pay too much for it or put too much debt on it, that's another leg to the stool. Well, now you got 3 legs. 3 legs is getting pretty stable. If you can find that 4th leg, so can anybody think of what a 4th leg would be in commercial real estate or in any kind of real estate? Neil?
Financing.
You can get into financing.
Insurance.
Insurance is another one. Cost segregation, which you guys will get this afternoon. The guy we work with here, if anything we refer to him, he pays us for that referral. So cost seg to our customers, that's another leg to the stool. Referrals, that's another leg to the stool. The more you can stabilize yourself, the better you're going to become. Bill, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I was going to say, not surprisingly, he just stole my whole first part of it. He was going to be specific.
I tried to give it to you.
You didn't know you did good. But he did an excellent job on, we didn't try to tap dance together and get coordinated, I guess, but he did an excellent job on the kind of nuts and bolts of syndication, and you know, you can Google a lot of that as well, just to make sure you get that right. It's really important that you do get that right. I was going to talk a little bit more on the fluff side, so to speak, especially I was hoping there would be newer people, and there are several of you here that are new, about exactly what he was just saying. But something that you might be interested to know, if you're going to get commercial real estate and you really want to make a lot of money and you're an investment sales guy, I mean, that's what you focus on. That's basically what I focus on. Neil, I think that would be fair to say you focus on that. That doesn't mean we don't have a few other legs, but that's our focus. I can tell you this as a fact. I don't do it all the time myself, but if you really want to make a lot of money in commercial real estate, you need to focus on an asset type. And it could be industrial, it could be multifamily, it could be whatever it is you want to, whatever asset you enjoy. And you need to focus on a specific market. And that could be, you know, depending on what town you're in, how big it is. When I first joined SVM, they told me, you know, you need like 300 to 400 properties, you know, in your sub-market that you're going to really become knowledgeable about. And they all need to be $1 million or bigger. And I was sitting there thinking, I can think of 3 in my little small town. And I thought, and so I sheepishly put my little hand up and said, what do you do about that? And they go, just expand your territory. Well, in my world, I thought I'll just move to Dallas. I didn't move, kept my home in Longview, but it's 2 hours away, and that just became my market. So that's another way to approach that. But I'm just here to tell you, the guys that make the most money in commercial real estate are super focused on an asset type. There's a guy, for instance, Jack Fraker, great guy, CBRE in Dallas. He only runs with about 5 or 6 guys. They're like analysts and help him with his packages and all that. He's got a little team. And I'll never forget, this goes back, Neil, back in when we were first getting started probably with SVN. I remember checking volumes on different companies and who's doing what. You know, you can check that stuff out. His little group of probably 6 or 8 guys did more volume than the whole company of SperryCGA nationwide that 1 year that I was checking it. That's unbelievable. But the reason is he knows he has encyclopedic knowledge of every asset in his marketplace. He knows the tenants, he knows the owners, he knows when tenants' leases are expiring. He just knows everything there is about it. So if you're Prologis or you're Cabot or one of the other large big industrial groups going to buy, who do you think you're going to call? You know, they're going to call the guys that know that stuff deep well, and that's why he makes, you know, does just super well. I have several examples of that I won't bore you with, but I'm just telling you, if that's what you want to do, focus on a specific type and focus on a specific marketplace. That doesn't mean you can't work nationwide, but get focused. Now, with that being said, you know, some of us are just a little too ADD to focus on that way, and you do need these other legs. So there is property management, there's development, there's ownership, and all that kind of ties back to the syndication idea. So yeah, but I will say this, and I mean this in the kindest way, and it might be a little bit in conflict with what you said, but don't go out there and try to syndicate a $100 million deal when you really don't know what you're doing. And I wouldn't know what I was doing either on a big deal. Make sure you know what you're doing. The good Lord tells us, you know, Billy Graham's got a new address, so I have to preach a little bit, but he tells us to expand our territories, you know, slowly. Make sure you know, if you've never done one, you start with a $500,000 strip center. You know, pretty soon you'll learn about how to talk to a landscape guy, you'll learn how to talk to the janitorial service, you'll learn how to unplug a toilet when you can't find anybody else. You'll start slow, but it doesn't take that long. As he's saying, you can move pretty quickly. I had lunch Friday before I jumped on a plane with a guy. He's probably mid-30s, started his real estate career not that long ago, literally started with a $700,000 deal. We just put a LOI, agreed LOI with him at lunch on Friday on a $4 million deal, and he's looking at $11.6 million deal. So I mean, this can move and happen pretty quickly when you get involved that way. But don't jump in there, because what's going to happen if you don't know what you're doing, you ask people that you may or may not know really well, and things go sideways, you won't probably do it again. If you do it right the first time, you'll continue to kind of keep moving forward. And there are all kinds. David is the master and has so much knowledge about different types of partnerships and syndications and the ways you can do that. I'm just telling you, the world is open, and if you just use your brain, there's all kind of ways you can get into partnerships and find that money. As you said, it'll follow the deal. How much time are we working?
Actually, Bill, if you're running out of time, I just asked Neil back.
Tell his story as
The
well.
story we had in the car yesterday. He's offered to come up and
Well,
give
come
us.
up. I got one more way. I'll finish this. That this again is kind of more for the new guys that we don't have to scoot through the development stuff we're working on. But one thing I'll tell you as well, and this doesn't apply to today and what we're doing, but one thing I learned early on in the commercial real estate business, you know, you're working with a little bit more sophisticated level than with people that are worrying about whether the bathroom's right color or not, you know, the residential stuff. So when you show up at somebody's office, be ready, be prepared, and be dressed appropriately. We had a Japanese client, and you know, you're never late to those meetings, and you're always prepared if you want to be successful. And we were working with this guy on a $35 million 1031. It was really complicated, really sophisticated. He lives in Tokyo, so he's in town. Well, I'm on my game. I'm ready. I'm there early. I know what I'm going to do. And we had another colleague. I won't mention his name because he's no longer with us because of this. He walks in that room with sunglasses on his head, blue jeans, and tennis shoes. You should never wear tennis shoes, blue jeans anyway. But I was just shocked. I'm sitting, and by the way, he was late. And this guy just looked at him like you know, he was instantly out, pretty well gone immediately. I mean, it's just disrespectful. So we always tell people, when you're going to go meet with clients, I don't care if it's $1 million deal or $100 million deal, be prepared and be ready and be dressed. I mean, if for nothing else, I hate putting on a tie, but for nothing else, you're showing respect to your client. That's really what that's all about. It has nothing to do with you, even though you'll feel better, but it has nothing to do with you. Another thing that's really important that I tell people, and I laugh about this because a lot of people take it either way, but this industry is unbelievably connected. I mean, it's one of the biggest in our country, in the world. But you won't get on a phone call without, if you just stay on there long enough, they're going to know somebody you know. So I always tell all the people we work with, tell the truth or die. I'm preaching again a little bit right there. We also say, I love this little saying where you've heard it probably before, it says go ugly early. So if you got a deal and you got a 10-year lease in this particular building, and you know they're only 2 years into it, but you know that company's fixed to go belly up, and you already know they're probably not going to make it, or they may be moving out. Don't hold that back. Tell them early, up front. Say, you know what? Here's the great news. This deal looks awesome. We got this 10-year lease, but by the way, this guy, he's shaky. But the good news is, if he blows out, we'll be able to replace that tenant, probably get a higher rate. It'll all be good. Well, you say that when you first present the property, that's like kind of positive. So then if the guy does blow out before close, or they find out that's gonna happen before close, everybody kind of knows where we are. You don't tell them, and you're 2 days before closing, and they find that out, it's ugly. So go ugly early. Oh, another little thing is I want to tell everybody that I think it's really important. Education is really good. I'd love to hear about that. I'm so old that I don't even have to do those, what are they called, the continuing education things. My broker license, I got when I was in college, and I got grandfathered. I don't even have to take those classes, but I always try to catch up. I'm going to learn from David tomorrow, matter of fact. So I'm excited about that. Keep learning. Oh, and one other little thing, multiple deals. Always try to have, and I know this is hard, but 2 or 3 or 4, as many as you can get in the title house, or whatever you guys like to call it, at all times. And the reason for that is, not only are you making more money, the reason for that is you do not want to be able to stare some guy in the face and say, we're done. I'm sorry, this deal's not working out. And it's hard to do that when you got one deal with the title company and your house payment's due next week and you're not sure how you're gonna make it. And you're looking at it going, you just keep begging for the thing to work. You can't negotiate from that weak position. Always have as many deals as you can up in front of you so you have the ability. I did it last week. I literally texted a guy and said, we're done. And then Friday we closed the deal. Because you've got to be prepared to say, and be prepared for it to be done. I did one not long ago and we were done and we were done. It did not come back. So, but anyway, those are just soft points I wanted to share. If Neil wants to talk about anything else.
Neil, can you come on up and give us your story that you shared with us in your car on how you accidentally stumbled into syndication many years back?
Yes, I'll be happy to share it. I didn't know I was going to be sharing this story with you, but I will.
I love the story. I think it's a great story.
Yeah, it was germane to our conversation at the time. We were talking about years ago. I got in the business in 1985, so I was quite young at the time, and my background before that was in the securities industry with a bunch of licenses, insurance license, and so on. But I didn't like the business at all. I worked for a company called Payne Weber that most of you probably have never heard of. But at that time, they had an office in Phoenix. Anyway, long story short, I got out of there pretty quickly and got into commercial real estate, and was at Marcus & Millichap. And a few years into it, we had what I always called the RTC days. For those of you who remember that, that was when the Resolution Trust Corporation was created by the government, basically, to pretty much take over the savings and loan industry. That's why you don't have any savings and loans anymore. And so, you know, a fairly new agent at Marcus & Millichap, we were dealing with banks, we were dealing with lenders, we were dealing with a lot of distressed properties. And I tell people that some of the people in the business today got their start in the RTC days, and I think that we minted, you know, a few dozen millionaires back in the day, because if you had $500,000, for example, you could buy a building and end up selling it for a few $1 million profit later. So I still have clients today that started with very little in the RTC days and became, you know, multimillionaires in commercial real estate. So one day I was chasing a property in foreclosure like we always did, and I did all the numbers on it. It was an office building, 42,000 square feet. I will never forget this building. It's on Central Avenue in Phoenix, for those of you who have ever been there. Central Avenue and Camelback, which is a great intersection. And the more I put the numbers together and found out what the opening bid was going to be, the more I decided that this was not a deal I was going to take to one of my, you know, multi-millionaire investors. I decided it was time to do something on my own. So I called one of my favorite clients, a doctor, a neurosurgeon, as a matter of fact, still a client of mine today, and I just said, his name's Murphy, and I said, Dr. Murphy, I've got this building, and it's going to a trustee sale. We didn't even have a listing or anything. It's going to a trustee sale in 2 weeks, and the opening bid's going to be X, which, by the way, was $22 a square foot, which was insane. And I told him a little bit about it. I had nothing in writing, just what I told him on the phone. And he said, well, how much you want? How much you need? And I said, I was going to go for like 900 some odd thousand. We're going to need a few $100,000 to turn this place around. And I said, I don't know, we're going to need probably about $1.2 million. And he goes, well, you know, what about 250? I think was the number. And I said, 250 would be great. Of course, you know, we were talking about this yesterday, you know, it was probably violating all kinds of securities laws back then. But the reason I wasn't too worried about it is he was an existing client. I was telling him about a deal. I wasn't advertising it. And by the end of the phone call, he had committed $250,000. That's like, you know, almost a quarter of the money. So he said, well, where do you want me to send it? Now, I definitely didn't want to get in trouble. So I said, no, hold on to the money. I said, I have to raise the rest of the money. And he said, okay, well, you know, keep me posted. And by the way, why don't you call Dr. So-and-so? Now, these guys are all in Ventura, California. And I said, oh, great, thanks. And he goes, I think he's an anesthesiologist. He goes, he's an anesthesiologist. Don't take any bullshit from him. He's got a lot of money. And I called the guy and I said, you know, Dr. Murphy referred me to you. And again, nothing in writing, just Dr. Murphy and the building. And by the end of that conversation, which was about 10 minutes, he goes, well, how much do you need? And I figured I'd stick with Dr. Murphy's investment. So I said, well, Dr. Murphy's putting in 250. He goes, okay, I'll do 250. And I'm thinking, great, you know, more than halfway, almost halfway there. I was trying to get to about $1.2 million because I knew I was going to need some additional cash. So we're talking, and he said, where do you want me to send it? I said, don't send anything now. I still got to raise the rest of the money. And he said, why don't you call so-and-so? Long story short,
Love this story.
the first group was 5 doctors and a general contractor, because after I got to the 5th one, they didn't all put in 250, just so you know. Like one put in 100, one put in 60 grand or something. So anyway, at the end of 5 doctors, we had the money for what I felt was going to be the purchase price, but we didn't have any of the renovation money. So I went back to one of the doctors, who was also a client of mine, by the way, and she said, well, why don't you call so-and-so? Turns out he's not a doctor, he's a general contractor. So I said, well, we have all the money raised, but I just need the money for the renovations. And he heard renovations, and his ears perked up. He goes, well, I'll do it if I can have final say on the renovations. Which, by the way, in hindsight, don't ever let anybody in any of your deals who wants that kind of control, because he ended up trying to take over the whole partnership about 2 years later. Anyway, at that time, we needed him. So I said, well, what does that consist of? And he said, well, I've been a contractor for 30 years. You don't spend any money until I approve it. And I said, okay, fine, what the heck? Because this was all in the space of 3 days. So I said, okay, and he committed the rest of the money. Long story short, I went to the trustee sale 2 weeks later. There were 3 or 4 other bidders. It opened at 900 grand. We got the building for like 950, like 24 bucks a foot. And so that's my favorite story of all time. And we bought that. I ended up moving my office into the building. I managed it and leased it and so on for about 3 years, and then we ended up selling, I think, way too prematurely. But that same group, with the exception of the contractor, because he was, like I said, if they're a pain in the butt in the beginning, they're going to just be a bigger pain in the butt later. So I sort of kind of nudged him out and stayed with that group of doctors, and over, I think it was somewhere around 10 or 12 deals. I call these back of the napkin deals, because again, these days you have offering memorandums and 506 and all this other stuff, crowdfunding. Back then I had literally a napkin if it was at lunch, or you know, my what do you call it, my yellow pad. I mean, that was my offering memorandum. And those 5 doctors referred me 12 or 14 or 15 others. And that group ended up buying and selling over time 10 or 12 more properties. Probably nothing over about $1.5 million, and probably nothing much smaller than about 700,000 or 800,000. But those were good deals back then, and a lot of money made. And I got, again, I didn't know how to do all this back then, so I basically said, well, I'm not putting any money in, and I want 10%. The first one was 10, plus I got the management and leasing contract, plus I got the sale on the back end. Then I figured go for 20, and then eventually they wanted me to start putting commissions back in. So the biggest commitment for me ever was about a $60,000 commission that I put back in the deal, and so I got a 20% stake plus whatever that bought, and I was the managing member on just about all of these partnerships. And the last one we did was probably 2005 or something like that. So it's great to be seeing this kind of stuff happening, 13 years later. We talked about it in my office too. We saw that same slide, but we didn't, that one just didn't, we didn't move on that quickly enough, and it didn't surprise me that you had these guys and Rich and everybody else probably jockeying for position on that. But we'll probably do some of these in Phoenix. Most of those doctors are all retired, and probably only one of them will get back in with me, so I have to now go find more people to invest.
5 minutes.
All right.
So there you go.
Thank you,
Hey,
Neil.
Neil,
Appreciate it.
So don't forget all of us over here when you start.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, don't forget us, we might want to be a player.
Oh, no, yeah. And the great thing, by the way, Keith taught us a lesson in Phoenix. He doesn't even know this, but, we sometimes have to haggle over, 2 and 3% fees, 4% fees, and then one day Keith came on a call and said we get a 10% fee. So I told guys in my office, gosh, they can do it in Birmingham. You got to start. Now it's harder to do in Phoenix, but long story short, we started asking for 10% fees. We never got one, to be honest, but we ended up with 8 once.
That's right.
We ended up with 7. We ended up with 6 a couple of times. So I thought, start much higher and drop a little bit. But the other thing too about out here over Phoenix is we used to have about a 200 to 300 basis point spread between cap rates in Phoenix and cap rates in Southern California.
For those of you that don't know that, that's a 2 and 3% spread.
Yeah. So we would get all of our clients from Southern California because they'd sell an apartment building. You could sell a 15 or 20 unit building in LA and buy a 150 unit building or a 100 unit building in Phoenix. Well, then the cap rates compressed, so they're like this now, and sometimes they're even at par. So when you start getting cap rates in Birmingham and Longview and some of these other places in the 8 or 10% range, that's 2 and sometimes even 3 times, 2.5 to 3 times what we're seeing back in Phoenix. I'm hoping that there's that spread again, but for right now, you get a lot of Californians saying, well, why would I buy in Phoenix at a 4.5 cap? I can buy that here. So we've lost some of that competitive edge, and a lot of our clients are saying, well, find me a tertiary market or a smaller secondary market. So that's why I'm glad that we've got somebody in Longview and somebody in Birmingham and Mobile and so on, because it's hard to find those higher cap rates today.
Thank you, Neil. Really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Great story. So I'm going to end this with one thing that Neil was talking about. He said he had to put his commission in on one of those deals or maybe a couple of those deals. There are some other ways to get fees when you're doing syndication. If you're a broker and they want you to put some of that in, just pencil in an acquisition fee, and you can get acquisition fees anywhere from 1% to 5%, depending on the deal and how much money there is available and how good the deal looks. The whole point is, if you've promised your investors a 10% cash-on-cash return, you need to be able to deliver that 10% cash-on-cash return. And if you price in a 5% acquisition fee or a 3% asset management fee that you can collect during the operations of the property, and it drops that cash on cash below that 10% return, well, then you don't need to be collecting that fee. The investors always come first, and that's probably the most important thing I can tell you about this whole thing with syndication. The investors come, period, cut and dry. I'm going to end it with that. Thank you, everybody.
Questions?
Randy's here. Yeah, does anybody have any questions? We only have like 1 minute.
Oh, too much pressure.
No? I know it's technical.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay,
Renee.
when you're pitching and you find the deal and you go out and you find the investors, are you pitching a flip?
No.
Are you
Well,
gonna-
okay,
are you
so
gonna buy
it
it and
depends.
flip it?
It depends on your investment strategy.
So what is their return? They lay out all this money and then they.
Well,
get what?
if you're doing a flip, then you're not doing a cash-on-cash return. You're doing more of a return on equity return. So in that case, sometimes they want to see 2.5 times, 3 times the equity on a flip. It just depends on if you're going to be managing the investment, then you really need to be structuring it the way you want to structure it, and then let the investors know this is how we're going to structure it. This is the money you can make on it, and let them put the equity up. You're putting in the blood, sweat, and
So
tears.
this isn't something that needs to be developed, it's already developed earning income.
It just
It's not a
depends.
piece
It
of
doesn't
land.
matter. It can be a piece of land. You can, we
You
send,
can land.
Well,
I
how
just
is that going to
syndicated,
be- how
I
does
just
it-
syndicated a land development in Florida.
And so now it has to be developed, so more
Yes.
money has to be laid out.
Right. but
No,
your
well,
investors know that.
in my case, I got a client that paid the renovation or the construction money up front, and then we're leasing them the land, and that's our cash flow.
Just about the land.
You'll learn about it.
Okay.
Yeah,
There's a lot to learn.
I was just gonna add something real quick. The one thing, if I learned anything from my experience with the doctors, and by the way, anybody who has worked with doctors, I think they're some of the best investors, please, because they love real estate, but most of them are just way too busy to really manage the investment themselves. And the one thing that they need is somebody that'll do all the work for them. They love to own it and point to it when they're in town and stuff like that, but they don't want to do all the rest of the stuff. But one thing that I found, if there's one overriding factor I would point to, is either give them a cash flow or give them a return, like on an exit, like a sale, fairly quickly, because the couple of deals where they got nothing for a couple of years, kind of pissed them off, and then they were much harder to get for the next deal. So that was the last time I did that. The very next deal went to immediate cash flow, or like somebody mentioned, a flip. If you
I guess that's what I was asking. You
You
gotta get a treble hook into them to continue to keep them.
Yeah, flip. I don't know about flips.
Basically,
I've never
they
done
want
Or to
any
keep them
flips.
for future.
So because of time restraints, we gotta get going. To
Sorry.
basically on that 39 unit we just bought, it cash flows already, so the investors are gonna start getting their returns within the first quarter. And then after the renovation period is over, we're gonna refinance that property, and we're gonna refinance it with a cash out refinance, meaning what we have in it right now, that $1,040,000 that we borrowed, we're going to refinance it at $1,340,000 because the property's gonna be worth $2.3 million when we get ready to refinance it. And that's gonna return the investor's equity back to them within 12 to 18 months. So you just have to plan all that in the beginning. So that's why they always say in real estate, when you invest in real estate, you always start with the end in mind. You gotta know your exit strategy before you ever purchase. And you gotta know that going in. All right, that's all the time we got. Thank you guys for attending. Randy's here, he's buying lunch, so we're going to Chinatown. Let's go eat.